My name is Mike Allan, and for most of my adult life, I believed I understood where I belonged. Nowhere special. I worked at the Westbrook steel plant for 16 years. Same shift, same noise, same routine. I was the kind of guy people described as steady, which usually meant easy to overlook. I didn't mind, not really. It's easier to stay invisible than to keep explaining why you don't have a family, why you never talk about your childhood, why the only photo on your locker door is of a house you once saw when you were 10 years old. The house wasn't mine, but it should have been. At least that's what I used to tell myself on the bad nights. On the morning everything changed, the plant floor felt colder than usual. The machines had gone quiet, never a good sign. Groups of workers stood around in uneasy clusters. I was walking toward the break room when my supervisor, Harris, stepped out with a clipboard under his arm and a look on his face that told me exactly what I didn't want to hear. "Mike," he said, scratching his neck, "I need to talk to you for a minute." The world didn't stop, but it did narrow. I followed him into the office. He shut the door gently. That was the first red flag. Harris wasn't a gentle man. "There have been cutbacks," he started, eyes avoiding mine. "Corporate wants to restructure the workforce. I'm really sorry, but your position is gone," I finished for him. He winced. "Yeah." 16 years. 16 years of never missing a shift, not once. 16 years of carrying the heaviest loads, doing overtime no one else volunteered for, covering for the guys who needed the extra break, and now, a half-crumb apology. I nodded slowly. "When do I leave?" He exhaled. "Today. Security will walk you out." Of course they would. Fired workers weren't supposed to touch things on the way out. As if I'd ever taken anything that wasn't mine. The office felt too small, too tight. I stepped outside before he could say another word. My co-workers looked at me with the kind of pity that lands heavier than any insult. I packed my things, a lunch container, a wrench my father gave me when I was 15, and that old photo of the mansion I'd kept taped to my locker. No one else knew the story behind it. No one knew why I carried it. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I knew anymore. Maybe because it was the only proof I had that once, when I was younger, someone told me I might belong to a different life. As the security guard led me to the exit, Harris jogged after us. "Mike, wait." I turned. He looked uncomfortable. Then he handed me a small envelope. "This came for you yesterday. Corporate mail. I forgot to give it to you." The envelope was thick, stamped with a law firm's crest I didn't recognize. My name printed clean across the front. Michael Allan. No return address. "Thanks," I muttered, not trusting myself to say anything else. Outside, the cold hit me immediately. I walked across the empty parking lot, my breath fogging in the air, fingers rubbing the strange envelope like it might burn me. I sat in my truck and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper and a gold-embossed card. "Michael, please attend a mandatory meeting regarding the estate of Leonard Hale. You're named as the sole heir. Date: Friday 10 a.m. Location: Hale and Birch Law Offices." Below it: "This matter is urgent." My heartbeat stalled. Leonard Hale. The name was a ghost, a shadow. A man I'd seen once from a distance standing on the balcony of the house from my childhood photo. A man who had no reason, no right to leave anything to me. But he had, and I knew, deep in my bones, that the life I'd been living was about to crack open. Because no one names a stranger as a sole heir. Not unless the past was hiding something big. I never thought a house could feel like a living thing until I built one that outlived the woman I loved. I was 24 when Margaret and I first stood on this patch of land. The soil was damp, the air thick with the scent of pine, and the world felt wide open. She held my hand so tightly that afternoon sunlight catching the gold in her hair and said, "If we build here, we build forever." And we did. Not all at once. Not some polished construction job. No. This house grew out of weekends and scraped knuckles, long evenings after work, and the quiet laughter of two young people trying to carve out a place in the world. Every plank has a memory. Every scuff has a story. The kitchen window still creaks the way it did the night I climbed a ladder at 2 a.m. because Margaret swore she heard an owl watching us sleep. Funny the things you remember. We raised our only son, Samuel, under this roof. I can still see him at 5 years old, racing down the hallway in socks, sliding across the floor and crashing into my legs while I laughed so hard I nearly fell over. I see him at 12, sitting at this very table with a plate of pancakes and a school project he forgot to finish. I see him at 17, standing in the doorway, car keys in hand, pretending to be grown but still looking to me for approval he wouldn't admit he needed. The house remembers all of it, and so do I. When Margaret died 8 years before all of this ugliness began, the house didn't feel empty. It felt wounded. A kind of quiet settled in the walls, thick and respectful, almost like it was grieving with me. I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning her. Some men move when their wives pass. I dug in deeper. This place was the last full chapter we wrote together. So yes, this house matters to me, more than I ever said out loud. Maybe that's why the first warning signs of my daughter-in-law Christine felt like small cracks in something she and Samuel married fast. Too fast for my liking, though I kept that opinion mostly to myself. It wasn't that I disliked her at the start. I didn't know her enough to dislike her. She came from a different world, sleek, polished, the kind of world that turns smiles into competition and politeness into currency. The first time I saw her walk through my door, she looked around the place the way someone inspects a hotel room before deciding if it's worth the nightly rate. "This is cozy," she said, and I remember the pause, the slight hesitation before cozy. Margaret would have offered her tea. I simply nodded and asked how her drive was. She talked over me when I answered questions. She corrected me on things I hadn't said wrong. She'd laugh lightly whenever I mentioned the work I'd done on the house, like I was reminiscing about something simple and outdated, and she had a habit subtle but sharp of making decisions for Samuel. Restaurants, weekends, plans, purchases. I watched her steer him without ever touching the wheel, but the moment that etched itself into me was a small one. It was a Saturday afternoon, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window just the way Margaret liked. Christine stood there beside the counter, holding a mug of coffee she didn't bother offering to refill for anyone else, and she said, "You know, Sam, once we get the upstairs repainted, this place might finally start to feel like ours." Ours? The way she said it made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. My house, my land, my lifetime. And she claimed it with a casual remark over coffee. Samuel didn't correct her. He didn't even seem to notice. That was the moment, a quiet, almost forgettable moment, when I felt the first real shift. Something moving in the soil beneath my feet. A faint tremor of warning. I told myself she was young, that marriage makes people bold, that she'd grow into something softer with time. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. But Christine only grew more comfortable asserting little pieces of my life as though they were hers by default. She spoke about the house like she was evaluating it for improvements. She walked into rooms like she was inspecting property. She rearranged things, Margaret's things, without asking, and every time I swallowed the discomfort, telling myself I was being sensitive. Every time I let it pass, thinking I was imagining the disrespect. But looking back now, with the clarity that pain delivers, I see exactly what was happening. Christine's entitlement wasn't a sudden storm. It was a slow, steady flood, and I let the water rise. People like Christine don't change overnight. They expand slowly at first, then boldly once they sense no resistance. I learned that the hard way. After she and Samuel moved in temporarily, to save for their own place, the atmosphere in my home shifted the way a room subtly cools when a storm is building outside. At first, it was the small things. She replaced the kitchen towels I'd used for years with thin designer ones that didn't absorb a drop of water. She put my old wooden fruit bowl, the one Samuel carved for me in 8th grade, into a storage box and set out a glass one instead. "Just making the space more modern," she said with a bright, empty smile. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. I'd walk into the living room and find the mantel rearranged, the photo of Margaret and me tucked behind plants that didn't need to be there. Christine said greenery made the room Instagram-friendly. I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew Margaret would have laughed and then put the photo back. I didn't. Maybe I should have. One evening, I found Christine reorganizing my tools out in the shed. "These were everywhere," she said. "I color-coded them so Samuel and I can find what we need." I stared at the neatly labeled bins plastic containers that made my tools look sterile and cheap. That shed was mine, my sanctuary, my order, my system. She'd upended it in an afternoon. I opened my mouth to speak, but Samuel came in behind her, grinning. "Looks great, right, Dad? She's got an eye for this stuff." He slipped his arm around her waist, completely oblivious to the tightening in my chest. I nodded, because what else could I do without sounding like a stubborn old man? But it wasn't stubbornness. It was a lifetime being quietly erased. Christine wasn't cruel, not openly. She had a talent for undermining with kindness, like someone correcting your grammar while smiling warmly. She made little comments at dinner. Some people just aren't used to new things. "We'll teach you, Allan, don't worry. I know you grew up in a different generation, or the worst. You don't need to worry about the house. We'll take care of everything now. We, that word again, as if my presence was temporary, as if my past had an expiration date. But the moment things truly shifted, the moment I realized she wasn't just adapting the space, but claiming it, happened on a quiet Wednesday morning in the kitchen. I was frying eggs, the way I had every morning since Margaret died. Simple, repetitive, grounding. The house was still half asleep, sunlight just beginning to touch the floor. Samuel had left for work already, and Christine wandered in wearing a robe that looked too expensive for a household where I was the only one paying utilities. She poured herself coffee, leaned against the counter, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know," she said casually, "Sam and I were talking last night." I waited. "We really appreciate you letting us stay here, but we've been thinking it might be time to establish some boundaries, adult boundaries." I flipped the egg slower, already feeling something unpleasant tightening in my gut. "Boundaries?" I asked. She crossed her arms and gave me a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "Well, yes, this is our home now too, and you've been here, well, constantly." I set the spatula down. "I live here, Christine." "I know," she said quickly, with a tone that suggested she thought she was being generous by acknowledging that fact. "But the dynamic has to be fair. We're a household of 3 adults, and Sam and I feel it would be respectful if everyone contributed." I stared at her, waiting for the rest. She lifted her chin. "You should start paying rent." Just like that. No hesitation, no softening, no awareness of the knife she'd just driven into the heart of everything I'd built. The kitchen felt smaller. My breath thinned. The refrigerator hummed loudly in the silence. "Rent," I repeated, unsure I'd heard correctly. She nodded, sipping her coffee like we were discussing the weather. "Yes, you've lived here a long time, and this arrangement isn't balanced. If you're going to continue staying here, it's only fair." Fair. She said it like she believed it. Like the house wasn't mine. Like the walls didn't have my sweat and memories in them. For a moment I couldn't speak. Not because I was shocked. Shock is sharp. This was something else. Something deeper. A slow, spreading numbness. A sadness so heavy it bent my ribs. "Does Samuel feel this way?" I asked quietly. Her smile flattened into something smug. "Of course he does. We talk about everything." That wasn't an answer, and that hurt even more. The kettle clicked softly on the stove. Sunlight brightened the tiles. The world didn't tilt or shatter, it simply rearranged itself in a way I'd never seen coming. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even humiliation, just a profound clarity. Christine wasn't the problem. She was merely the final symptom of something I'd ignored for too long. "Think about it," she said, as if she'd offered a reasonable suggestion. "We can discuss monthly amounts later." I nodded slowly, but inside something was changing, something subtle and quiet, like a lock turning deep within a door that had stayed closed for years. This was the moment the story truly began. It's strange how a single sentence can rewrite your entire history. "You should start paying rent." Christine tossed those words out like she was rearranging furniture, careless, thoughtless, completely unaware of the weight she'd placed on my chest. But the real pain wasn't in what she said. It was in the echo of Samuel's silence behind it. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the same one Margaret and I painted in our 20s. The glow from the street lamp cast a warm amber square across the wood beams, and I traced the familiar cracks with my eyes. I'd never felt like a guest in this house before. Not until my own daughter-in-law told me I was overstaying my welcome. It wasn't anger keeping me awake, not fully. It was something more complicated, more fragile. I felt displaced. My thoughts wandered to my father, a man of few words but unshakable principles. He always said, "A man must know where he stands, and he must stand there firmly, or someone else will take the ground from under him. I'd forgotten that. Or maybe I'd let myself forget, out of love for my son. Love, or fear of losing him. I rolled onto my side and let the truth soak through the dark. I had made myself small for years, made myself accommodating, patient, too patient. I'd allowed disrespect disguised as politeness, entitlement disguised as confidence, intrusion disguised as help. And why? Because I didn't want to cause trouble. Because I didn't want Samuel to think I was difficult or stubborn. Because I didn't want to be the old man clinging to the past. But lying there, unable to sleep, I realized something I should have recognized months before. By staying silent, I had taught Christine that my boundaries did not exist. And I had taught Samuel that I did not need defending. The truth stung. I sat up in bed, the air cold against my back, and pressed my palms together like I used to when I prayed with Margaret. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not out loud, but that night, her memory felt closer than ever. "What would you have told me?" I whispered into the quiet. I could almost hear her answer. Firm, gentle, unyielding. "Allan, dignity is not something you can give away without consequences." I swallowed hard. She was right. She always had been. The next morning I woke with a dull ache behind my ribs, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. While Samuel got ready for work, Christine made breakfast as though nothing had happened. She hummed lightly, tapping her nails on the counter, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. When she placed a plate in front of me, she said, "So, have you thought about what we discussed?" Not if I wanted to discuss it, not whether it made sense, just had I accepted her terms yet. I felt a steady, quiet heat in my chest. Not rage, but resolve. "I'll need time," I said. Her smile tightened. "Of course, just not too much time." The audacity was almost breathtaking. Samuel came downstairs then, adjusting the sleeves of his shirt. He kissed her cheek and gave me a nod, as if we were acquaintances passing in a hallway. He didn't ask how I slept, didn't ask how I felt about what Christine said, didn't even seem aware of the tension thickening the air like humidity before a storm. On his way out the door, he said, "We'll figure this out, Dad." This, as though we were negotiating something that belonged equally to all three of us. After they left, the silence of the house felt different. Not peaceful, not warm. It felt reclaimed. I walked into the living room and ran my fingers across the side table Margaret and I sanded ourselves. My touch lingered on the carved initials hidden underneath a secret only we knew about. She used to joke that the house would always recognize us as its rightful owners, and that's when it struck me. I didn't need to defend my place here, I only needed to remember it. I went upstairs, pulled out an old metal box from the back of my closet and sat on the floor with it. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something like awakening. Inside the box were the documents I'd nearly forgotten about. The original purchase papers, notarized building permits, the insurance agreements, and finally the deed. My name, clear as day, Allan Barrett, sole owner. I held the deed in my hands and let out a slow, steady breath. This house was not hers to claim. It was not Samuel's by default. It was not a communal space for anyone to take over. It was mine, built by my hands, paid for by my sacrifices, held together by memories that belonged to me and Margaret. Christine had mistaken kindness for weakness, and Samuel had mistaken silence for surrender. But I was done being silent. I placed the documents into a leather folder I hadn't used in years. The weight of it felt satisfying, real, final. That night sleep still eluded me, but not because I was lost, because I was planning, because I was finding my spine again, because a man who rediscovers his dignity doesn't drift off easily. He sharpens. I didn't confront them the next day, or the day after. Revenge, true revenge, the kind that doesn't rot a man from the inside, requires patience, precision, and above all, calm. I spent the next week doing something I hadn't done in a long time. Observing, not reacting, not shrinking, not trying to smooth over tension to keep the peace, just watching. It's remarkable how clearly you can see people once you stop trying to please them. Christine grew bolder, Not because she was malicious, at least, not in the dramatic sense. Her cruelty was the quiet kind, the everyday kind, the kind you can almost convince yourself you imagined. On Thursday, she moved Margaret's favourite vase and old ceramic piece we bought from a roadside vendor on our 10th anniversary to the top shelf of the hall closet. "It looks cluttered on the mantel," she said, as if it were self-evident. I didn't argue. I simply noted the way she closed the closet door a little too quickly, as though hiding something she had no right to touch. On Friday, she told Samuel they needed to budget better, and suggested I handle grocery shopping from now on. "We're already covering so many expenses," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "It's only fair he chips in." I stood at the doorway unseen and watched my son nod. That single, small motion nearly broke me. But heartbreak is different from defeat, and I was done feeling defeated. Saturday brought the moment that sealed everything. I was in the backyard trimming the rose bushes, Margaret's roses stubborn and fragrant, when I heard voices from the open kitchen window. "Christine, he needs to decide soon. I'm not playing landlord for free." "Landlord?" "Samuel. He just needs time. He'll come around." "Christine, he has to. He can't just expect to live here without paying like some elderly tenant." Elderly tenant. I stood perfectly still, pruning shears in my hand, listening to the last of my illusions dissolve. Not because of the words I'd heard worse things whispered by people who thought they were safe, but because of the tone. There was no affection in her voice, no respect, no understanding of what this home meant. But more painful than her voice was Samuel's silence. My son. My boy. The child I taught how to ride a bike in this very yard. The man who once promised me on the night of Margaret's funeral that he would never let anything drive us apart. His silence now was a betrayal I hadn't prepared for. That night, I took the folder containing the deed and placed it on my lap at the kitchen table after they went to bed. The clock ticked in the quiet, steady enough to calm my breathing. My hands felt old, more wrinkled, more weathered, but they felt strong too, stronger than they had in years. I opened the folder again and traced my name on the paper. This house wasn't a gift from me to them. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't a shared asset. It was mine, legally, financially, historically, emotionally. Christine hadn't just crossed a line, she'd tried to redraw it. I wouldn't let her. The next day, Sunday morning, I left early and went to see my lawyer, a man named Robert Hastings. We'd known each other for decades. He handled the paperwork when I refinanced the house 23 years ago. He adjusted his glasses and looked over the folder slowly, carefully. When he finished, he pressed his palms together and leaned back. "Allan," he said, "this is clear as it gets. The house is in your name alone. No joint ownership, no transfer of rights, no complications." "I needed to be sure," I replied. He gave me a long look, the kind that weighs more than words. "What happened?" I hesitated. "A misunderstanding," Robert raised an eyebrow. "Must be quite a misunderstanding if you're bringing me the deed." I didn't explain. I didn't need to. There are humiliations a man shouldn't have to speak aloud. He slid the papers back to me. "You have every legal right to decide who stays in your home, and under what terms." The phrase echoed in my mind, every legal right, as if the words restored something heavy inside me that had been leaning too long. When I stood to leave, he said, "Allan, whatever this is, don't let them take advantage of your kindness." I nodded, but inside I wasn't just nodding, I was making a promise. I returned home that afternoon feeling something like clarity, strength, peace, not the fragile peace I used to keep by staying quiet, but the real kind, the kind that comes from knowing where you stand. Christine was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She didn't greet me, she rarely did. She glanced up only when I walked past her without a word. For the first time since she entered my life, she looked uncertain. Good, I thought. Let her wonder. Let her feel the ground shift under her feet for once. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here, and I wasn't the one about to get swept away. I don't know what I expected to feel when the truth finally settled in my bones. Maybe triumph, maybe closure, maybe a quiet, cinematic moment of victory where the music swells and I walk away a hero. But life isn't a movie. Life is quieter, stranger, and sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones that make no sound at all. That night, After I walked out of the house that had almost swallowed me whole for the second time, once through grief, once through betrayal, I went home, my real home, the one my wife touched with her hands, the one she filled with warmth, the one that had almost faded into a museum of memories. I sat on the porch in the cool air, listening to the wind move through the trees. For the first time in years, I didn't feel a weight on my chest. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel old. I felt awake. I had lost a son long before today. That part still cut deep. But I realized something as the hours passed. Not everyone you raise becomes family. Not everyone who marries into your life becomes kin. But character tells you who someone truly is. And the law had spoken. The world had spoken. Even my son, in a heartbreaking backward way, had spoken through the will he tried so hard to hide. He married a woman who cared more about bricks than blood. He tried to steal what wasn't his. He forgot who kept his lamp lit, who fixed his broken cars, who held him when he cried as a boy. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt the most. It was that he thought I was weak enough to walk all over. But he was wrong. Rebecca's parents moved into the house within a week. They thanked me like I'd given them the world. Maybe I had. Stability is a rare kind of wealth. They kept it clean, beautiful, loved. They treated it better in those 7 days than Emma and my son had in years. My lawyer handled the rest. Documents signed, leases terminated, locks changed. Emma tried to message me once. You didn't have to destroy our lives. But they were never destroyed by me. They were destroyed by greed, their own. I didn't reply. Some battles aren't worth reopening. Weeks passed. The story spread through the family, cousins, siblings, people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Some called to say they were proud. Some said I'd done the right thing. Some said nothing, but their silence sounded like respect. I didn't want praise. I didn't want to be right. I didn't even want revenge. I just wanted to reclaim my dignity. And I had. One evening I walked through my late wife's garden, still alive, still blooming, still soft under the fading sun. I touched the petals she once planted and whispered, I did what you would have wanted. Not punishment, not anger, just truth, just justice. A gentle breeze moved the wind chimes she hung on our first anniversary. They rang softly, almost like an answer. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to close my eyes, breathe deeply, and imagine not what I had lost, but what I still had. My home, my peace, my future, and the quiet, unmistakable certainty that I had finally put an end to the long, painful chapter that should have ended years ago. Some stories don't end with explosions or screaming or slammed doors. Some end with a man standing in his garden, hearing the faint echo of a woman he once loved, and knowing deep in his soul that he has done right. This was one of those stories, and I walked back inside to start a new one.